Hello, and welcome to an intro to Anthro with two humans. I'm human number one, John McCray.
And I'm human number two, John Lehr.
And this is the podcast where we reassess what it means to be human. And the title of this episode is Wild Child in the City, The Perils of Being Feral. So,
Wild child in the city. Do-do. Oh shit! I just got a copyright infringement.
Yeah. You'll have to go in later and take that out. Put in something in the public domain. You'll have to put it. Why is he singing that?
It'll be Green Sleeves or something.
But anyway, John, today we're going to talk about feral children.
This is great.
And historically, when you talk about feral children, you're talking about either children who grew up alone in the wild.
Like Tarzan,
right.
The most famous.
Right, which we will talk about. Or you talk about children that were raised by animals.
Like,
as well.
The Jungle Book.
Mowgli.
Mowgli.
Well.
Yes.
Right. And for most of our history, people have thought that these feral children were somehow miraculous. And nowadays, we know that there were probably some physical or mental impairments involved in these cases.
Yes.
And most likely some form of severe neglect or extreme neglect.
Yeah, well. You think so? I mean, Jesus.
Yeah. But for most of our history, people didn't really think about it that deeply. And in other words, 500 years ago, 400 years ago, if you saw a kid wandering around out in the woods by themselves, and if they didn't speak and they didn't want to be touched, people would usually go, okay, this has got to be a feral child. This is a feral child.
Wow.
And then from there, it was just people started wondering, well, how did they survive? How did they get by out there on their own? And then from there, it was just a short jump to, well, they must have been raised by animals.
Yes.
That's the only way to explain it.
Well, and now we have that saying, raised by wolves.
Right.
Raised by wolves.
Exactly. And then the next step was always like, we got to catch them. You know what I mean? You got to go out and catch them and bring them back into civilization. But before we begin, I was wondering if you and I we need to get like a little background on us to figure out where we are on that wild spectrum.
Yes.
On that spectrum of wildness. Yes. And
my brother and I were both of us got into a lot of trouble.
Real? Did you? Were you wild?
I
out of control?
My brother was the one who got caught. But yeah, we had a lot of latitude. Let's put it that way.
Was it like verbally? Were you verbally wild, or would you just like wrestle a lot? What would you do?
Yeah, we were children of the 70s, as I imagine you were, no car seats, we were latchkey kids, meaning that our parents both work. So we would, have lots of time where we were unsupervised. And then we had, those were the days before fences, where you could just take your bike and go wherever you wanted.
Right.
And so there was that, that aspect of it too. And then you have things like fireworks. Like I tell my kids, like we used to have bottle rocket fights, or Roman candle fights and shoot. And my kids have nowhere close to that. Now, granted, they live in Los Angeles, which is, But we were shooting. I remember shooting Roman candles at my brother. All kinds of stuff like that, or playing with fire or gasoline or crazy things, dangerous things, ramps and jumping our bikes off of ramps, or go-karts at full speed down busy streets, or throwing water balloons at cars. I remember in high school, we would carefully open the garage door without making any noise. There was a way to do it. You had to have the touch. And then we would put my mom's Rabbit, she had a Volkswagen Rabbit, put it in neutral and push it out, and then push it down the street and start it at the bottom of the street, My brother at 16 was arrested. He rolled his Mustang He bought a Mustang and he rolled it off this highway, and they found him, an empty bottle of Jack Daniels, and a 26-year-old woman.
Oh, no.
And your brothers, I'm sure, David, got into trouble,
Oh
right?
yeah, my brothers were wild as well. What was interesting is with my brothers and my siblings, because they were much older than me, I was kind of socialized to be older, to act older.
Uh-huh.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Uh,
Yes.
and so I didn't really get in a lot of trouble, like normal trouble about like, John, calm down, you're going out of control or whatever, because I was trying to be like 10 years older than I
Right.
actually was, you know.
Right.
Eventually my actual age caught up with the age I was trying, and then overpassed it. So now I'm still being immature. But there was a time where I was like, I was acting older than I actually was.
I remember
And then
playing a drinking game with I feel like your brothers were there at your house. Star Search. We were playing Star Search.
I don't know. I don't know.
Anytime Ed McMahon said champion, we had to
Yeah,
drink
yeah,
or something like that.
yeah. Boy, you would get really drunk off a
Yeah.
champion. I mean,
Yeah.
because he was every other word out of his mouth
Yeah.
was a champion. New champion beats our
A
old
new
champion.
you had to chug it. If it was a new champion, you had to chug. I feel like
My
that was
brother,
your place.
I don't know, but my brothers would. There was a time when they were like in their early 20s, and I was still pretty young at that point, like uh, 9 or 10 or something, and so they'd have to babysit me at that point. And they would take me to the bars with them because that's where
Yeah.
they weren't going to let that babysitting stop them from going to the bar. So
And that's where you became the foosball player that you are.
yeah, pinball. I grew up playing like pool, pinball, all the bar games. But again, you can't have a crazy kid in a bar. You know what I mean? So I would always
Right.
try to be behaved in there.
But nobody can beat you at foosball except maybe your brothers.
My brothers could be. Yeah.
Yeah. You're a badass foosball player.
But have you ever been around somebody who, for whatever reason, they're usually pretty reserved, but then you see them, just like you take them out into a different context, and then they just lose their mind. They go crazy.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, I'm in recovery because
Yeah.
I've been sober. We've both been sober a long time, but I don't know if you ever run into this in the recovery world where you run into Mormons. When Mormons go bad, the stories they have is like insane. Insane.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about that culture, that subculture, but man, when they go out, whew.
Yeah. Yeah. Years ago, I worked with a Mormon who was in recovery. And when he'd fall off the wagon, it was horrible. We were on a grounds crew, and they'd always put me in the truck with him because everybody knew, like, when he fell off the wagon, he was coming back twice as hard, like, oh. So we'd be driving around on the grounds crew just listening to him, like, pour out his guts for me.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah. I don't know what it is about that, but when they go bad, they go bad.
Yeah. We had one where a friend of ours in Santa Fe, a wealthy woman, older, for some reason years ago, we decided to take her out, very reserved, decided to take her out to a haunted house attraction, like at Halloween where you go. And so we took her down to Moriarty, New Mexico. And there's a bunch of people out there. It's huge. I mean, it's just crazy. They got all kinds of haunted mazes and haunted houses, and there's music. Yeah, it's really amazing. She went insane. She like lost her mind. She was like jumping around and singing and dancing and running around and touching people's face, like strangers, like running up to strangers and touching their faces. And Mary and I were both like, oh my God, what is going on? Like, it was just, it was so freeing to her, which in one sense,
something deep and pagan inside her. And she wow.
We love it. I mean, it was great to see it, but it was also, I thought, I'm going to get in a fight. I'm going to get in a fight because she's going up to complete strangers and tickling their faces and stuff.
Yeah,
and people were just like,
people's faces.
Yeah. It was very strange.
You don't even touch your lover's face until you guys know each other.
You have to have years of wearing gloves with that before
Yeah,
you get to
yeah.
go out.
People don't like their
Tongue
faces being touched. That was the hardest part about being the Geico caveman is that I had people touching my face for
ooh,
hours and hours, you know, it just was like,
ooh,
God,
ooh.
stop it. Stop touching my face.
Do you feel that did your parents give you guidance on how to behave in public or how to behave? Or
I
did they come
mean,
right out and say,
not really. I mean, no, no, manners were not important to my mom.
yeah,
Um, and I remember, my mother, was just she was too tired. She was too
yeah,
exhausted. My dad
yeah,
wasn't really in the picture, and my mom. I remember one time my brother and I at a grocery store, and I'm sure this is one of dozens, but this is just one that sticks in my head. Where I would put my brother in the grocery cart and
yeah,
then
yeah,
push it as fast as possible all over the place. I mean,
yeah,
really fast,
yeah.
crashing into stuff. I remember the look on my mother's face, which it was just heartbreaking, where she just looked
Yeah.
at us and was just like, I want to be, I wish you were never born. She was just like, how did I get this hell, this
Did she
prison?
try to pretend like you weren't her kids? Like every like do you ever do
She
it? She
did.
would like,
She
yeah,
did.
yeah,
She went on to another part. She knew she
yeah.
couldn't control us. When we were fighting, she would just push us in the backyard and lock the door. 'Cause we were too big at that point, you know? And
Yeah,
she would just do
yeah.
everything she could to get us out of the house, lock the door, and be like, "Figure it out."
I had, my mom too was working all the time, working two
Yeah.
jobs. And so as I got older, I didn't really have anybody because my dad wasn't around. So I didn't have anybody. So I had to like create somebody in my mind to
Oh.
tell me what to do, and just to, like pull back the curtain, maybe I shouldn't go there. But so again, like you were saying, in the 70s, watching sitcoms,
Yeah.
or like reruns, who was the dad? And so in my mind, I created Ward Cleaver
Ward,
in my
yeah.
head. He was like
That's
the
amazing. And he would tell you when you were pushing things too far?
right. It was like I had a
Oh,
little Ward Cleaver down in the living room of my mind who
yes.
would tell me what to do.
John?
Yeah.
Oh my god, that's so sweet and
And
slightly
so
disturbing.
yeah,
You
it
were
is
Beaver.
disturbing.
You were the Beef.
Yeah, well, I was hoping I was Wally, but yeah, I was probably more like the beef. But Ward Cleaver, he gets you so far, you know what I mean?
Yes,
But then when you
yeah,
get older, it's like he doesn't know how to deal with like if your girlfriend thinks she's pregnant or
yes,
something, you know what
exactly,
I
yeah.
mean? It's
That's where
not like
Ward's out of
yeah.
his league.
Well, Wally, when when I was in the Navy with the fellas, we he's trying to come up with some solution for that. So after a while, I had to go to like a real therapist, uh,
Yes.
and we talked about the Ward Cleaver in my
That's
head.
amazing. You've never mentioned that to me. Yeah, what you're the pre-therapy McCray and the post-therapy McCray is really amazing. You had what I can only call a spiritual experience
Yeah.
in therapy. It really helped you a lot, it seemed.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I love therapy, and I always when people say like, "Well, I went to therapy and my therapist says I'm okay," and I'm
Yeah.
like, "Well, do you feel okay?" It's like, wait a second. I didn't want my therapist to tell me I was okay because I
No,
wasn't feeling okay. You know what I
no.
mean? I always wonder about people like that. Like they say I'm
Yeah.
fine. I don't have to change anything. It's like, really?
Okay.
You can always work on something. Uh, but yeah, but I still know it when it's still there. That Ward Cleaver is still sitting down there reading the paper in his sweater. You know what I mean?
Smoking his
And
pipe.
yeah, and I know it's him talking to me. Every once in a while he'll talk when I talk to myself in the second person, like you should do this, you should do that.
Yes.
It's like that's not. I should be saying I should do that, or I should,
Right.
the
But that's
the
your
you.
parental voice. Yes.
Right,
That's why the
right.
Quran is so powerful, because the Quran is written in the second person, or at least
Mm,
the translations
mm,
are in the second person,
yeah,
and it's such a powerful
yeah.
when it's like somebody's talking directly to you. I
Yeah.
wonder if
It's not
that
a
was
suggestion. It's not a suggestion. It is telling you, giving you what
right.
you should do. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
remember being up on stage in Chicago, and it was a terrible, terrible show. It was an improv show. And a guy was watching, he goes, "You suck." And I thought, and I thought he was just talking to all of us. And then he locked eyes with me and pointed right at me and goes, "No, you suck." And I was just like, "Oh, Jesus, I got to get out of here."
That's hilarious. He was probably a writer for a writer for the Sun Times or something.
I don't know. He didn't look like a writer from the get-go. He's a big, beefy Chicago sports dude.
How about your own kids? Are your own kids out of control, or how do they do? Or were they
You
ever out of
know,
control?
I mean, yes, they are. My daughter is like, she is such a good kid. I mean, she's like, but my son was feral basically, and in
Yeah.
fact, people called him Mowgli because he has because the Lears have sort of a
Yeah.
dark skin streak to us. It runs through like sort of olive skin, dark Irish,
Yeah.
black Irish kind of. So he had and people would confuse him for Latino or
Really?
Asian when he was younger. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he had this, but he never wore shoes. He didn't wear
Yeah.
shoes until kindergarten.
Wow.
So, and in
Wow.
LA, that's like Crazyville. But you know what? I think it had a lot to do with how good of an athlete he is,
Yeah.
in a weird way. Because he knows his body, and he was always climbing on shit. He was always filthy. Boy, listeners at home are going, "What kind of parent were you?" But he's turned into this amazing kid, who's
Yeah. Yeah.
this elite athlete and
Yeah.
this amazing drummer, free thinker. So we were very progressive parents. I always said my parenting style is when they would ask something, I would be like, "No," and then they'd ask it again, and I'd be, "All right."
You just have to get through the first one.
Yeah,
Just get through
I
the
would
gate.
fold. I would
Yeah.
fold just immediately. But
Once you're
somehow
in the door, you got him.
But they've both turned out to be amazing kids. So just goes to show that parenting doesn't do anything. It's all hard.
Yeah.
You can screw it up. You can definitely
Yeah.
screw it up. But as long as
Yeah.
you don't screw it up, they're going to be who they are.
Well, that's the whole thing. I feel like, you or like you with your kids, or we definitely had humans around us to help guide us a little
Right.
bit. You know what
Yes.
I mean?
Yes.
But what if we didn't? What if we didn't have any humans around us at all when we were like just forming? You know what I mean? Just from
So
like our
weird.
first 3 years or 4 years. And that's kind of what we're talking about when examples of feral children. And people have studied them and tried to understand them, and usually it's to try to integrate them back into human society to help them reclaim their humanness.
Mm,
And again, it's like I don't even know what if there is a abstract or objective type of humanness, but that
right.
was the always idea, to try to bring them back into being human.
Civilization.
Uh,
Usually it meant religion, I'm sure.
yeah, a little bit of
Religion
it. Yeah.
and education.
But the wild child or feral child or human child raised by animals is also a very popular character in myths and legends throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael Newton, in his book Savage Girls and Wild Boys, A History of Feral Children, talks about a lot of those famous examples. For example, Moses. Moses
Mm,
was left in the river. So he's
yes.
a Moses, feral child.
Really? Wow. But he was discovered by but he was raised in the Pharaoh's temple, right? He was discovered
Right.
by I think it's the Pharaoh's sister? I can't boy.
Pretty quickly. He was found pretty
Yes.
quickly, I
Yeah.
think. So in the movie, it's just like right around the corner or something like that. But he was at one point abandoned by his parents.
True. Yeah. Mhm.
There's also Semiramis, who was the founder of Babylon. Legend says she was raised by birds, by
Ooh.
doves, or sometimes pigeons. Sometimes they
Wow.
say,
Ooh. Don't birds eat their food, throw it up, and put it in your mouth?
I think so. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, is that
That'd
how
be my
Cineramus grew up?
that'd be my
Oh,
luck of being raised by like suckled by pigeons.
mm.
Just,
There
that
was
sound of
this
all of them
guy I
coming up.
knew who went to Italy, and he did the
Yeah.
pigeon thing where he went out on the and put. But you know how some people will put like bread in their mouth and the pigeons will come up and take it and
Oh.
stand on his head and all along his arms. And he got sick as a dog. And he was kind of surprised by it. I'm like, what the fuck? You had pigeons all over you. Disgusting. Of course you got sick.
In your mouth. The pigeons in
Ugh.
your mouth.
I'm like, do you lick doorknobs too?
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know that was a thing, but is there like a tour company taking people out there to
There's that square in Rome where there's all these pigeons and
Yeah.
people will, I don't know. Anyway, don't go near pigeons. They're disgusting.
In Greek legend, Paris, the son of Priam, the king of Troy, he was supposed to have been left on a mountaintop and nursed by a bear. That one.
Boy, what do you do when the bear hibernates? Suddenly you got nothing for 6 months.
Yeah.
Wake up, I'm hungry.
You better stock up. You got to stock up. At least a bear I could kind of see like would keep you warm in there. Like a bear would be like a big I mean, I don't know how much warmth you're getting off of a pigeon. You know what I mean? A pigeon had to.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, did you ever see that movie Grizzly Man? Did you see that movie about that guy?
Oh, the guy who was living with the bears and then was killed?
Yeah.
I never saw it. No. I never saw it.
It's I read the book and also saw the movie by Werner Herzog. And I really felt for the guy. He had come out to LA wanting to be an actor. Didn't work out like it doesn't work out for 99.9% of everybody. Yeah. Became an alcoholic and an addict, got sober, and then he got into going out and living with bears up in Alaska.
So weird. How do you go from that to that? Where does that come from?
I know.
Where do you wake up and go, you know what? I want to live with grizzlies.
Like
one of the most dangerous planets. Should I live with grizzlies or sharks?
Yeah.
I guess I'll go with grizzlies. Jeez.
You know how it is when you're getting clean, though.
You're out of your mind. It actually makes total sense. You're absolutely right.
That's what I mean. It was like everybody was like, "Why would he do it?" It's like he was getting sober in L.A. Of course, he went up and lived with grizzlies.
Yeah, he didn't know what the hell he was doing.
You got a nipple ring?
Masturbation. I got a nipple ring and masturbation. That was how I got through it. And coffee.
He went and lived with grizzlies.
Yeah, tomato.
and then there's probably the most famous legendary children that were raised by animals, and that's Romulus and Remus of Rome. And they were two brothers in the 8th century BC in Rome, and they were supposed to have been raised by a she-wolf at that time.
Yeah.
And like in a lot of the legends of abandoned kids, the story goes that they were grandsons of a king, and the king was deposed, and so they were like abandoned in the Tiber River, left out to die, and a she-wolf found them. And the other part of the story,
not a he-wolf, but a she-wolf.
A she-wolf, yeah. I don't know how much work a he-wolf would do for you.
But we know the pronouns from the get-go on the wolf.
Yeah. And another part of the story is a woodpecker was also involved. A woodpecker would bring them wood to keep
Why would a woodpecker doesn't bring wood? Woodpecker pokes in holes in wood to get the insects.
Yeah. I don't know. He's part of the story as well.
You lost me with the woodpecker. I was with you with the she-wolf.
Eventually, they were found by a shepherd named Faustulus, and they grew up to lead a band of outlaws. And they overthrew the guy who had overthrown their grandfather, and then they started to build the city of Rome, and then Romulus killed Remus in that old story.
Yeah. That's a great story.
That is a great story. The bad part of that story is once they got the they got the city of Rome together, they realized there was no women there. All those outlaws realized there were no women, so they went and
Mhm.
kidnapped a bunch of women from the Sabine tribe
What?
in Italy. Yeah,
Jesus.
and that's how they got the women to bring back to Rome. But if you notice, they say kidnap or abduction. There's a lot of paintings from the Renaissance that also talks about the rape of the Sabine women. So you get the
Oh,
idea that
Jesus.
maybe
Okay.
at that point it would have been okay to leave Romulus and Remus out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing that's kind of interesting is the term lupa in Latin means both prostitute and she wolf. And
What?
when they told the story of the being suckled by a lupa, it
Mm.
could have been wolf or prostitute.
Mm.
What was more like shocking to Romans was to be suckled by a she wolf rather than a prostitute.
Interesting.
So yeah, um, but anyway, that's just something to think about. And there's a couple other points that Newton makes in his book. He says, and he's talking about the story of these children being raised by animals. And he says, when the infant's lips close upon the she wolf's teats, a transgressive mercy removes the harmful influence of a murderous culture. The moment is a second birth where death is expected, succor is given, and the children are miraculously born into the order of nature.
Mm.
So
Yes,
again,
that makes sense. That's part of the myth is the
right,
coming
right,
is what are we without all of this artifice we've created?
right. And it's like by the animal accepting a human baby and raising it,
Mm.
again, it's like humans love second births. We love our
Yes.
second
Love
chance. You know what
Yeah,
I
we
mean?
do.
And so the animals, it's somehow that's the miracle. Somehow that's restoring the nature, the order of
Mm.
things by having an animal raise a human being
Mm.
and save them. And Newton says nature's mercy admonishes humanity's unnatural cruelty. Only a miracle of kindness can restore the imbalance created by human iniquity. And
Mm.
again, that's what we're talking about is that the animal protecting us uh, is miraculous, and we've always seen it as miraculous.
Yes.
Uh, and anyway, that's how people have always seen feral children throughout history, and somehow by surviving on their own, or even better if they've been saved by animals, they have bridged the wild and civilized sides of our nature, the beast and the human. And
Which is
and, and
Tarzan. I'm just thinking Tarzan this whole
right,
time, you know.
right. And actually, when I was reading that, I was thinking, if you look at it that way, then it becomes a psychological story. You know what I
Yes.
mean? It's
Yes.
id, ego, subconscious, conscious, kind of being brought together somehow.
Well, it's like, you think of, like, Iron John, which was
Yeah,
the book about that launched the men's movement, in the,
yeah,
70s and
yeah,
80s maybe, but the story of Iron John is the classic story, which is like Romulus and Remus, you're destined to become the king, but in
yeah.
order to become the king, you have to go through the ashes, go through this
Right, right.
transformative process. And a big part of the turning point involves the wild man, the sage, the
Yeah,
hermit,
yeah, yeah.
meeting with the who's somebody who is more nature than humanity, lives
Right.
in the mud or lives in the rock or the tree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's it. That's it. That's
Yeah,
very similar, if not exactly the same as this.
and it's only
Um,
through that you become cleansed in order to then take your rightful place.
right, right. Just a quick story as an aside. We used to, when I worked for the Italian Tourist Board in Chicago, we had a plastic full-size replica of a she-wolf suckling two babies.
Kidding.
It's a famous statue, like old statue from the ancient times, called the Capitoline wolf. and it's a she-wolf, and there's two little babies underneath it,
Romulus and
suckling.
Remus.
Right.
Wow, that's
And
crazy.
yeah, but ours was plastic. It wasn't bronze. But we
No.
used to loan it out to people who were having Italian festivals, or for, if they were having parties. And so one time we had it, some guy came down, he owned an Italian restaurant in Chicago. He came down to pick it up because he wanted to use it. And I remember he backed in his little pickup into the loading dock, and we come walking out with this thing, and he just looked at it, and it's just like the teats are there, and he's just like, "Oh, Jesus Christ, look at the teats on that thing." And then he's like,
like nobody's gonna eat my lasagna.
Yeah. He's like, I got to drive across town with that thing, and it's and we're like, well, do you want us to take it back? He's like, no, I drove all the way down here. Go ahead and put it in the back. So we put it in the back of his truck and tie it down. And you see the she-wolf like nursing these two naked babies in the back of his truck. And then he drives out, and we go running upstairs just dying laughing to watch him out of the 10-story window as he's going down Michigan Avenue.
It's a great story. It's great imagery until you have to put it in the truck and drive down public street.
I know. It was just like, he was just ashen when we brought it out. He was like, oh, Jesus Christ. Look at the teats on that thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because, oh my God, yes. I just love that. There's a bestiality kind of quality to it where you're just like, Jesus.
Yeah, it was. But anyway, as humans, I think we're still even fascinated by feral children, and you'll still find them in popular culture. Like you mentioned, Mowgli.
Mowgli. What about Mad Max? The kid who throws that weird feral kid who.
Yeah. And then, of course, you get back to, you've already mentioned Tarzan, who's like probably the most famous feral child story in the world at this point.
Yes.
And he was originally written by Edgar Rice Burroughs in 1914, Tarzan of the Apes. It's the story of John Clayton, who's an English lord, and his wife Alice. And he's taken a job down in Africa, and on the way, there's a mutiny on the ship. And the mutineers actually like him because he had like helped out one of the mutineers. So instead of killing the Claytons, they maroon them in Africa, and they put all their things ashore with them at that point. Anyway,
that's
so
not
John
really marooning if you get your stuff too.
I don't know. Usually, I always thought it was just like one pistol with one shot.
But still, that's less of a maroon is when you're on your own. I think that's more of a drop off.
Yeah.
And here's your luggage. Well, you're not really marooning somebody if they have clean underwear.
Did you like, what was that one with Tom Hanks? Where he was,
with the volleyball. I wasn't a fan. I was
really
exhausted by it. Yeah.
That was
an incredible performance. I was just so aware of the acting the whole time. I was like, all right, get your Oscar, but I need to see a lightsaber or something.
Yeah. Well, he's the only one out there. You're gonna like forgive the guy for chewing up the scenery.
Yeah.
That was another one in therapy. I mean, it came out a very big metaphor for me.
Yes.
And so I'll say that. That'll be another thing.
Okay, great.
People are going to think I'm crazy at this point.
Like, well, you are, but in you're fabulously insane.
Ward Cleaver and a volleyball. That's the only thing rattling around in my brain right now.
Better than your partner who's got nothing, just air. Here's what's in my brain right now. Just nothing.
Just like air. It's
like, a tone.
Like it's like going by the hose at the gas station to fill up your tires. You just hear it running over there.
Yes.
And here's something about the book. I mean, the Claytons, they're marooned there, and then they have a baby. They have a baby when they're there. So it's like, hey, I'm not going to stop having marooned spoil my fun. We're still going to have a baby when we're here. And then of course, she gets a fever, she dies, and then he's killed by one of the chimps. And then the baby is taken by a chimp who had just lost her baby and raised as a chimp. So, and
and as we've discussed in a previous podcast, chimps are badass creatures.
I know.
They're super strong and badass.
Right. I was watching, I watched a couple of the Tarzans this week to get ready for this. And after having done our, episode on chimps, it scared me to death to see like chimps around people. Because I'm like, it could
that
just
poor actor who was the most famous one who played Tarzan forever. Forgot the name of the actor, but anyway, the one in the 50s.
Johnny Weissmuller.
Yes.
Yeah.
God, he had to be around those chimps all the goddamn time. And that was before there were any safety measures. Come on, Johnny. Put it on your head. Come on.
It's just a bite.
We all want to go home. Put some chicken broth on his arm so the chip will come over and lick him.
Yeah. It sounds awful.
They drag a steak across the set out of frame so that the chimp will run off.
Yeah. Or like the lions. The lions too are just like scared to death whenever they show that.
Yeah.
There was what's interesting, I didn't know until I read the book this week, was Tarzan was actually his name given by the chimps. I thought people had given him that.
Man. Back to chimps talking.
Yeah, it's in the book, the chimps have their own sort of like chimp language, and they're the ones that give him the name Tarzan, which means white skin.
Okay, now you lost me. There's no way chimps can pronounce glottals.
Yeah.
You want to tell me that a chimp can make this sound?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I've never seen a chimp do that.
Well,
now you lost it. The fourth wall has fallen.
Yeah.
And now I see Tarzan
right into the fan site if you don't think it's possible.
I might. I'm going to post.
The other thing, which, and even Tarzan himself teaches him, he goes and finds his dad's books in the book, and he teaches himself how to write English.
Oh, boy.
So that's what.
Okay.
Which I think there's taken some cognitive liberty there with what's happening.
Oh my! The mutineers. This story just falls apart. The mutineers. First of all, mutineers aren't going to let you have your chests of books. I'm sorry.
Yeah. There, it seems like the book, when you read it, a lot of the plot seems like a publisher saying to Edgar Rice Burroughs, like, well, how is that possible? You need to justify that. You need to justify that. You need to justify that.
And he's just like, God damn it. There were some books. There were some books, and he taught himself. Okay, can we get on with it?
Even the movie with Christopher Lambert, which came out in the early 80s, they even tried to justify why he could suddenly speak so well with, he's a natural mimic. They had to put a line in there that Tarzan's a natural mimic.
Natural mimic. Boy, you know what, though? I've been there. I've been in notes meetings with where they're like, but why? And you're just like, I don't know. It's funny. Yeah. Do we have to figure out why?
Yeah. You should do a Tarzan. You should do a Tarzan.
A Tarzan. That's a good mashup.
Yeah, that is.
I couldn't do it. We'd have to get. I'm not playing him. We'd have to get a young, handsome dude. You don't want to see me in a loincloth. That's for sure.
What about that thing they did with De Niro in the Irishman? They could try to make you look younger.
Oh yeah, that's true. Ooh, I'd love that.
They could give me a screen capture.
Yes. So I'm in a leotard with all the golf with the ping pong balls glued to it, but meanwhile on stage I look like a hand. Yes, that's a genius idea. Let's do it.
Everybody else in the cast is going to be wearing period costumes. As we're filming,
I'm in a leotard
with ping pong balls.
I'm a natural mimic.
We'll have, when we do the interviews for like Entertainment Tonight and stuff, they'll all be wearing like their three-piece suits, and you'll be wearing your just sitting up on the chair with your
my legs crossed with a ping pong ball stuck out of my crotch. Yes, every part of me had to be tracked.
This is one of the most challenging roles I've ever played.
Oh, to go to the restroom, I'd have to take the entire thing off.
The human endurance that's responsible. Tarzan wishes that he would have had it easier than I did making this movie.
To save time, I can remove this ping pong ball and unzip it.
But anyway, in 1914, if you think about when this book came out, it was a lot of subtext in the book itself, such as Darwin's theory of evolution, which was only a few decades old.
Right.
Psychotherapy with like Sigmund Freud. You had like the subconscious that was coming, subtext in there too.
Where does humanity live? Where is it?
Right.
Love that.
And then you had also politically, you had the colonization of Africa, which was often brutal, and then you also had, usually. So you had that subtext in the book as well, and then you had the idea of repressed sexuality in the Victorian era as well. When you bring in Jane Parker, the character of Jane in the book,
He's like, because he's all open and like, I like you. You're pretty.
Yeah.
He goes with his animal instincts.
Right. And so there was, even though the book itself was kind of corny at times, if you put it in context of when it came out, there's like some heavy duty stuff being dealt with in the book itself of Tarzan.
Interesting.
It's
like what's the one with all the kids? Lord of the Flies with the conch.
Yeah,
is that Lord of the Flies?
Lord of the Flies. Yeah.
Similar.
Same thing.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah. And Bram Witcherink, in his article "Tarzan: The Untamed Image of the Perfect Savage," he talks about how popular Tarzan is, how people just embrace Tarzan. It's been translated into 56 languages. More than 15 million copies sold.
I'd like a piece
80
of
movies.
That. 80?
80 movies between 1918 and 2008, which would be one. If you averaged it out, it would be one Tarzan movie a year for the last 100 years.
Hey, McCray, we should bang out a Tarzan film.
I don't get your
leotard
on.
Get your leotard on. I'll get my golf balls or my ping pong balls Velcro to my suit.
And there were also radio shows, television shows, animated cartoons, and then there's even a musical, a Tarzan musical by Phil Collins. Did the music for it.
Phil Collins? The drummer?
Yeah. He did
wrote a musical of Tarzan? Those were some lean times.
Yeah.
Those are some lean times.
It sounds a lot like I Can Feel It in the Air Tonight.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of drumming.
Yeah. He's like, oh, I can just see Phil Collins in the meeting. Like, what? Yeah, Phil, listen. All right.
A lot of drumming.
Stretch it out. I'm a drummer, so I can do that part.
But Witcherink says that Tarzan of the Apes clearly reflects the early 20th century zeitgeist and its inherent frustrations with the restrictions of modern life and the quest for civilization.
Yes.
So if you think about it, when it was coming out, remember we've talked about it before, people who with industrialization, people are being displaced and moving to cities.
Yes.
And in the middle of all of this change, you have this story of a guy who doesn't know where he belongs. Like he doesn't belong in the jungle. He doesn't belong in the civilized world. He doesn't know if he's animal. And the other thing that Witcherink talks about is with World War I, people were starting to confront the savagery, like just pure savagery of warfare and of the war.
Yeah.
And he says that World War I demonstrated that savage impulses could spring from a civilized man's heart under certain circumstances.
Yeah, we're not all that. We're still right back to Romulus and Remus.
Right. And the idea was, here it is where if the prior age had been the age of reason, it seemed at that time when that book came out that the 20th century was the age of savagery, of the age of being an animal almost. And Witcherink quotes Alan Barnard, who wrote that Tarzan came to symbolize, at a certain point, they tried to respond to that, of like, how do we deal with this savagery? And so Tarzan began to, the character of Tarzan began to evolve. And at one point, Alan Barnard says he came to symbolize the most desired objects of Western culture, including power, youthfulness, and rugged individualism.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. He became a superhero. Really?
Right. He is a superhero.
He's a superhero.
He flies around on the vines. He can talk to animals.
And by the way, that's really hard, to do that with vines. You really got to set those vines up in advance.
Yeah.
Because if you get all swung the way out there and there's no vine, what do? You just hang there.
Just crawl down and then swim back to the shore and start over.
Yeah, or walk. Just walk.
Just walk down. It's always funny whenever you see those movies. When you describe it in the book or in a cartoon, it really looks like you're flying through there on the vines.
Right.
You see an actor try to do that in real life. It's it's pretty tedious.
Right. I mean? Well, he's 3 feet off the ground, first of all, because but then you can always tell that there's a platform built just out of the camera's angle that he stops at, and then the next vine is kind of hung there, ready for him.
Yeah. And then Witcherink quotes R.J. Rushdoony, who's also an author, who said, with his natural goodness and nobility, as well as his stance apart from civilization, Tarzan became a noble hero and a natural man. So that's what we're talking about.
Yes.
And again, you have Johnny Weissmuller. He's this noble Tarzan who fights Nazis and protects the jungle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Did you watch the TV show in the 60s with Ron Ely?
Yes. I saw some episodes. I mean, but like we said at the beginning, we were both semi-feral, so the TV was all we had. We didn't have a she-wolf or chimpanzees to raise us. We had TV. We had Gilligan's Island. Fortunately, we had Mr. Rogers. Leave It to Beaver.
Remember Ron Ely's his Tarzan's like he was on the TV show. He was almost just like a park ranger. He was like a park ranger in his underwear. Yeah. And then also, there were movies that started to come out with Tarzan. They had always made movies, but remember in 1981 there was Tarzan of the Apes with Bo Derek and Michael O'Keefe.
Boy, do I remember that one. Yikes!
Remember. And again, Tarzan could be whatever you wanted Tarzan. You could mold Tarzan to be whatever you wanted to be.
Whatever you wanted, yeah.
And actually, Bo Derek's Tarzan is told from the point of view of Jane Parker. It's like Tarzan, you get no backstory of Tarzan at all.
He just is.
Yeah.
He's just there.
And it's he doesn't say anything. It's just it's almost a sexually awakening, because as soon as she sees him, he's like a romance, like a guy you'd see on a romance novel. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so is she. Jesus. That was
the weirdest thing. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a terrible movie. Terrible.
Yeah.
But steamy as hell.
Yeah. And what's weird about it, though, is at the very end of the movie, you have just Jane without her shirt on, Tarzan, and an orangutan in Africa. Why you would have an orangutan in Africa, I don't know. But you have them
maroon too.
Yeah. It also was raised by the chimps. But you have them just frolicking at the end of the movie. Like the three of them, like she's decided to stay with Tarzan.
And not wear a shirt.
Not wear a shirt, and she and Tarzan wrestling with this orangutan. And maybe John Derek thought that was the metaphor for a woman's awakening. I don't know.
I don't know if John Derek was thinking that clearly at the time.
Yeah.
I don't think he was thinking about much. There was a lot of blow going around on movie sets at that time.
Yeah, it's a strange movie. It's a very strange movie. And then in '83, you had Greystoke. Remember, this one tried to be a little more serious. Greystoke, The
Yes.
Legend of Tarzan, Lord of the
Yes.
Apes.
Yes.
And that one tried to like show his backstory, the struggle between being an animal and being human. Andy McDowell's first movie in that one.
Oh my God. She played
Yeah.
Jane?
She played Jane, yeah. And what was sad about that one is because of her accent, her southern accent, they had Glenn Close dub her dialogue.
No.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh.
yeah. It was awful. It
Why
was.
couldn't she have a southern accent? What's wrong with that?
I don't know. She was
She
supposed.
came from the colonies.
Yeah, she
Just
was, and then
re
she was supposed to have come from the colonies, or they set it up that she was from America.
Well, what the
But
hell? Give her
yeah,
man, I don't know. They should have pushed back on that note.
I know.
Yeah.
So anyway, then you get to Rushduni says that Tarzan becomes a contemporary embodiment of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's myth of the noble savage. And here's where we're starting to get back down to it. Is that Rousseau's noble savage, Rousseau was a French philosopher in the 18th century, and he argued that before we had civilization, original humans existed in a natural state in harmony with nature.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only once we had civilization that we became corrupted.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
in our natural state, I mean, obviously we didn't think about much. We didn't really need to think about much in the natural state.
Well, this myth is like Carrie still lives, very much at the forefront. This idea that all of our technology, all of our civilization, we work. You always hear this. Always pops up in a news feed of how many more hours we work now than we did back then.
Right.
Yeah, but back then we didn't have toilet paper. It was really uncomfortable. All the time.
I think it's a romanticized view of what the world would have been like before civilization.
It's like the Wild West. Oh, it was a horrid time. The more you study that period, the more you realize everybody was drunk because it was so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Just nasty.
But the thing is, why is this? How does this fit in with feral children? In the 1700s, they started finding a lot more feral children in Europe. Yeah. And it just, they'd always found feral children, but in 1700s, it seems like maybe because of like communication was better or something, but it became more popular. People started hearing about feral children more. And what philosophers thought was these feral kids, they must be what Rousseau was talking about because they've been raised without civilization. They've been raised on their own, or they've been raised by animals. And so philosophers in the 1700s started to think, we can use these kids to study what humans were like prior to civilization.
That's a jump.
Yeah, it is a jump. And also they, even if they didn't say they thought we can study them to see what the human mind is like before civilization was.
Yeah. Or without language. Without language is so interesting because we think in language, we that's how we think. So how does it work? How does the brain work without language?
Right. Because some people would say you need language at least to understand what you're seeing or somehow
to frame it up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But they thought that these feral children that were being found in the 1700s, they thought they could also look at them to see the pure human mind.
Okay.
Now there's problems with that. There's problems with that thinking, But this was the Enlightenment. This is the Enlightenment.
Right.
So
glass half full.
Right. And if you look at even Carl Linnaeus, who's the guy who gave us the two name classification system for animals and plants. He actually classified wild or feral man as a separate species of human.
Oh, Carl.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
And no.
So in his classification system that he came out with, Mary McNeil, Edward Holloway, and David Smith say that Linnaeus labeled them Homo ferus, or wild man, to distinguish humans that had been raised apart from other men or humans that have been raised by animals from humans that have been raised in society.
Huh.
So,
Okay.
so you have one of the preeminent naturalists of the time actually saying there's a separate species of humans called wild man, Homo ferus.
Yeah. I disagree.
I know there's problems with it. There's problems. But Linnaeus, what he said, there were three things that distinct characteristics that set aside a wild man, a true wild man. And one was that they were tetropus, meaning that they walked on all fours. They were mutus, meaning that they didn't have language. And they were hirsutus, meaning that they were hairy. And
Oh, hairy?
Yeah. And the thing is, usually what people, looking back on it, like researchers will say, like, yeah, most of the wild kids that were being found did walk on all fours or had trouble walking upright. And they also didn't have language, but they don't know where he came up with this idea of hairy, like how hairy came across. So you see there's like some myth still being built into the science at the time as well.
Yeah, very much so.
And then what Nancy Youssef in her article, Savage or Solitary, The Wild Child and Rousseau's Man of Nature, says that Linnaeus's classification of wild men represented a tantalizing and uncanny blurring of the conceptual line separating man and beast. So again, Linnaeus, preeminent scholar at the time, has set it up to where we have like a half step in between humans and beasts, which would be the Homo ferus.
Wow.
Yeah. So what were some of the most famous examples of wild children back in the 1700s? We'll talk about some of them. In the book, Feral Children and Clever Animals, Douglas Keith Candland tells the story of Wild Peter. And Wild Peter was captured naked in the woods near the town of Hameln in Hanover, Germany in 1724.
Wow.
And he looked like he was about 12 years old. He sat on his haunches and walked on all fours. He didn't like cooked foods and would eat only raw vegetables and grass. He would catch birds and eat them raw. He didn't like clothes. And he couldn't speak at the time as well. And again, when you hear that now, you're like, this is like a cognitive disability, or this is a physical disability. But at the time, they were thinking that this is one of Rousseau's wild men, or Linnaeus's wild men.
Yeah. Wow.
And nobody really thought to like verify his backstory, and he couldn't speak to tell them what his backstory was. So people just started it just from just legend or myth. People were saying, well, he must have been raised by bears, because how else could he have survived for this long? And to give you some other descriptions of Peter at the time, one of the writers said that in his first year of captivity, he ate enough food for 2 men. So he was hungry. When he had been out there for so long, he was hungry.
Well, okay.
Yeah. And then he said he relished a glass of brandy. He liked the fire, but showed all of his life the most perfect indifference for money. So again, it makes sense, because if you're not brought up in that culture of knowing what money is, then obviously you would think, what's the point of money? It doesn't mean anything.
Well, yeah, and it's like a cat. The difference between a cat and a dog is a cat doesn't really need you. A cat can leave and go hunt and survive, whereas a dog is kind of screwed. And that's why cats are so amazing as pets, because they're like, yeah, I'll hang out with you.
Right.
But I'm sure that is true for Peter too. Is like, why do I need money? I can always,
Yeah.
It's worked out so far.
Yeah. I was like, why'd you guys capture me?
I can go get a bird and some grass. I'm fine. Jesus.
The other thing that shocked people at the time was, and this is, a lot of the feral children reports I read mentioned this. He had a complete indifference to women or the other sex. Like he had no interest in sex whatsoever. And
this is even as he became an adult.
As he became an adult, they said he just wasn't interested in it.
Okay.
Which again kind of makes you, I mean, if that's a common thing of feral children, then I think they took some liberty. At least Bo Derek's Tarzan takes
Yes.
some liberty with it. That would have been a different movie, I think.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know.
Uh, and Candland says that the philosophers at the time thought that Peter could advance our knowledge of what is innate and what is acquired through experience. So again, they thought that he was what were we born with? We could look at what Peter was born with and what he had acquired through culture at the time. And then also what happens is it's strange that Peter, the king of England was also the ruler of Hanover at the time. So Peter was sent to England to meet the king. Okay, so this wild boy was sent to England to meet the king. And again, that's something I found where it seemed like rich people at the time were really fascinated by these wild children that were, and usually would be their sponsor for them. But it always has that sense of like just an entertainment almost.
Right. What can we, let's try to tame the beast.
Right. And see what he does. How is he going to entertain me? So they would bring Peter out to like dinners with the king. And Newton notes that Peter was placed with a napkin tied to his throat at the table to see how he would eat. He had no notion of behavior or manners, but greedily took with his hands out of the dishes. He loved asparagus. And
Who
then
doesn't?
the other thing he would do, he would always pickpocket, because he would always try to take things from people. But again, this is like, to me, doesn't sound like real science going on. This sounds like just an entertainment for somebody.
This is a carnival.
Yeah.
Jesus.
And then eventually he grew up. I mean, George I died, and then people kind of got bored with Peter. It kind of like fell out of the public eye, and he was placed with a farmer outside of London, and he lived until 1785. So he was like in his 60s when he died. But he never spoke his entire life. They said that you could give him little jobs to do, but if you didn't stay right with him, then he would turn around and undo the little job that you had given him to do. So again, to me, it always sounds like this is a cognitive issue.
Yeah.
And then we come to in 1797, a wild boy was captured in France, in the Aveyron area of France. He was called the Wild Boy of Aveyron. And he was seen out in the woods, again, naked, running around. They captured him. They tried to lock him up. He escaped and was loose again for like 15 months. And then they captured him again. He escaped again.
Wow.
Yeah. And then in 1800, they finally caught him. And, he was like 4.5 feet tall, naked, covered in scars. Had a scar on his neck that people thought maybe somebody had tried to kill him. He walked with an uneven gait. And at the time, people said he seemed like he was more animal than human at the time. And he was sent to Paris for medical inspection. And the doctors who reviewed him, and this was interesting to me, the doctors at the time even thought that he wasn't a wild man, like a separate species. Like there were even doctors at the time who were saying he's a human with severe mental disabilities.
Yeah.
But again, the story of being a wild man was already in the public eye at that point.
Right.
Yeah. And so anyway, there was people responded how he didn't seem to have like normal emotions. He didn't really respond to people. He was, and again, with the idea of being in the 1700s, of like people, to be a noble person, you were supposed to show generosity, show compassion for other people.
Right.
They said he had no sense of compassion, no sense of, so again, it's seeming to me that this is someone with, it's not a philosophical problem. This is actually a human being with issues,
Yes. That maybe was abandoned because of those issues.
Right. Exactly. And so there was a Dr. Itard at the time who decided that he was going to tutor the Wild Boy of Aveyron. And I think Jean-Luc Godard has actually done a a movie on that about
Wow.
their
Well, this sounds
interaction.
to me like, Pygmalion, like
Yeah, yeah,
the idea of taking somebody and raising them up.
right,
uh,
right,
Elephant Man,
yeah,
or probably the most notable would be Helen Keller.
right,
You
exactly,
know, because
exactly.
she was just this wild, and it wasn't. There was she just couldn't communicate. She'd just never
Yeah,
been, yeah.
yeah.
And then she goes
No, I
on to
mean,
be this amazing person, apparently.
I know, yeah. And Itar, apparently, Candland says that Itar's first aim was to convince Victor that a social existence was much more pleasant than a life lived amongst the rigors and loneliness of the forest.
Yeah,
So again, he was going to try to convince him of like, stay with humans, stay here,
yeah. Why
don't
is
go
this
back.
better? And the wild kid is like, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. And Itar says that, Victor's activities, he says, were of four kinds: sleeping, eating, doing nothing, and running about. Which actually sounds pretty good to
It
me.
sounds like my day.
I know,
Yeah.
I know. Uh, Itar eventually gave him the name Victor because oh was the only sound that he would respond to, that he would look around to. So he tried to come up
Really?
with a name would use oh. So he came up with the name Victor.
Oh,
So
okay. What about just
uh,
calling him Opie?
yeah,
Oh, or just call
oh
him
oh
O. Oh, oh.
Otto Otto.
Oh, no. Oh, oh. Oh, no.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But anyway, uh, Itar like worked with him for like 5 or 6 years or something, and eventually he just gave up. Even Itar gave up.
Wow.
But he did write a book about the experience, of course. Uh, and he concluded in his book that Victor's years in the wild would leave him forever unable to use language and only incompletely socialized.
Hmm.
So, and Nancy Youssef says the difference between Itar's conclusions in 1801 and 1807 cannot be overstated. In 1801, just a few months after Victor was caught, uh, he was seen as like a representative of man in a pure and natural state.
Mm.
So in 1801, they were still thinking that like, okay, we can.
Hmm.
This is Rousseau's natural man. We're going to see what the pure mind is. And then she says in 1807, Victor can no longer be seen as such, for he has been introduced to the society of others, ministered to, educated, and yet he has also made no substantial progress
Mm.
beyond his initial condition.
Mm.
So in 1807, they realize there's something else going on with this, and he can't advance beyond what we've already tried to give him.
Yeah.
And so that's why in the
Poor
like
kid.
yeah, that's why as you read all of these stories, it's just tragic. It's tragic
Yeah.
with it because um doctors eventually in the 1800s started to look at these as like more like a cognitive problem,
Hmm.
uh behavioral problem, or a linguistic problem. um
And
there's
an
also
abandonment issue. Parents just who couldn't handle it.
right,
You
right.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably not that they grew up on their own, or like you're saying, that probably the parents didn't know what to do with it, so they
Yeah.
abandoned the children out.
Yeah.
And McNeil, Holloway, and Smith also note that there's a critical period for learning language at the beginning of a child's life. And if the child doesn't learn language in those first few years of life, they probably never will, or like
Interesting.
not completely. Um, so again, kind of beginning to sum up, is all of these mythological and fantastic stories about children being raised by animals or raised on their own or growing up on their own, uh, they were probably just due to severe developmental
Yeah.
issues. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And
And
just parents who just couldn't handle it.
right, right.
And you
And
look at parents of autistic children who are severely autistic, and it's amazing, because it's fuck.
yeah, yeah.
Those are
And
amazing
just
people.
And so Bruno Bettelheim, who's also a psychologist, he wrote an article in 1959 called "Feral Children and Autistic Children," and he was saying that that was his argument, was that a lot of these feral children from history were actually autistic children.
Yeah,
and
sure,
but
sounds
he also,
like it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's cognitive. To me, it's not obviously not a separate species, but obviously. Cognitive and developmental problems going on. But Brudelheim says when he talked about feral children in the past, he said feral children seem to be produced not when wolves behave like mothers, but when mothers behave like non-humans. And so his argument was like this abandonment or like severe abuse of children when you're very young would lead to some of these cognitive problems.
Blame it on the mother. Blame it on the mother.
well, I think
Frenchies. Yeah. Here we go.
And he says the conclusion tentatively forced on us is that while there are no feral children, there are some very rare examples of human beings who become feral to one of their children.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So,
but it's more complex than that, isn't it? I mean, it's also like you're poor, you have no support, your husband, I mean, Jesus,
Yeah.
But but I agree. It's these kids aren't raised by wolves. They're abandoned by parents who weren't capable.
Yeah. Whew. Well, I wasn't meaning to end on such a downer, but I think it's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
To think about it. So
yes, and and the connection to this idea that we have to find our hairy side, the side of us that we have to, like it's such a deep rooted story for us. Call of the Wild, like all of the these ideas of returning to our better selves that are somehow connected to nature, because we're just we are not that. We're astronauts. We've built this artifice where we're just walking around in spacesuits now. We're totally not natural. There's nothing natural about us. We go to the woods like we're going to a museum.
We've been going out like taking our tent and our generators and everything is like returning to a natural state. But I think you're right. I think we still hold on to that. We still think that somehow civilization it's corrupted us, and we need to get back to nature. And I think you still find it with people with like,
because and I think the hard truth is there is no going back. It's too late.
Yeah.
We blew it. That's over.
Yeah.
We're now this other weird species that is disconnected from everything that is natural.
Yeah.
Driving around
I got
our
news
cars.
for you. You should have done that 60,000 years ago. You should have gone off the grid then.
It all comes back to the 2001 with the bones. That prehistoric man picked up a bone and hit another ape with it, and here we are. God damn it.
All right, John. Well, I hope we've learned something. Maybe people will think about all this when you're watching The Jungle Book or Tarzan next time, about what actually goes on.
I got to go back and check out some Tarzan. My God, the TV show was so hilarious.
Or go see the musical. Go see Phil Collins' musical about it.
I'm not a Phil Collins fan. I never was.
I liked his one album. What was it? Face Value or something like that. It was like one album I really liked.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was that his early one after they broke up, after Genesis broke up?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
He still had a little bit of it.
Yeah. He's really into his own face. You know what I mean? It's like all of his albums have pictures of his own face.
Yeah.
We should do an episode on that sometime.
Yeah.
The face. What the face means.
Narcissism. Love of self.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. This is human number 1 signing off. I just want to thank you for joining us.
And human number 2, thanks for listening, everybody. Signing off.
And if you found this podcast interesting, please tell a friend about it. And don't forget to check us out on Facebook and Instagram. And be nice to your kids. Be nice to your kids and your animals.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Love you guys. Love you, John. Bye.
Bye.